So today I thought I'd show you my latest project using a special tool. The project is this one. It's called Twister Holiday. It is a wall hanging of a wreath, and I guess on the picture here they've added a bow afterwards, which I think is a nice touch. And it's not a very complicated pattern because it's basically made up of squares, as you can see. And the pattern says it takes 100, where did they read this here? 169 3.5 inch squares. And they show you, they have a diagram here showing you how to lay this all out and what colors to pick. In fact, there's a very extensive list of colors, and it looks like they're using in the background different shades of white, but I've decided to pretty much go with all the same type of white. Now, the pattern on the white pieces up here might be slightly different in some, but it's very subtle. And also, I'm trying to use this as a scrap buster and a fat quarter kind of thing, which I think does lend itself to this. So this pattern, however, once you have all the 3.5 inch squares cut out and laid out, you're supposed to follow this little map right here and lay it out and then stitch together each row. And then you put a border, which I have cut over here, on the top and on the sides. Now that's the piece you're going to be cutting up. And you're going to be cutting it up using this device. It's called the Tiny Twister. And essentially what it is just this. Let me put it here. It is just a little ruler or template with a couple of crosshair lines on it. And you line these up in the margins, or not the margins, in the seams of your various blocks, and then cut, and you get a final piece, once you put the pieces together, that looks like this showing down here, this kind of sort of a stylized fan or windmill look. And that's really what this whole thing is made up from. So I will show you how to use this tool as I work through this process. But right now, as you can see, as I said, I have all my pieces cut out, 3.5 inch squares. This is where my Quilt, yeah, get the words out. My Quilt came in really handy because it made short work of all of these squares. Like I said, I had to have 169 3.5 inch squares. So they're all cut, they're all labeled. My next thing to do is to follow the diagram and lay them out and sew my rows together. So I'm not going to bore you with the sewing process on this because it's very straightforward. I'll come back after I have the piece done to show you the next stage, which involves cutting that piece up. Okay, so right now I'm in the process of putting all of the 3.5 inch squares into rows. And there is a particular pattern, as I showed you, that you need to follow for this. And in order that I don't get all mixed up, I'm not doing chain stitching with this. I'm putting one at a time on, and I'm finger pressing my seam allowance, in this one's case, to the left, and I'm alternating that between each row. So odd number rows go to the left, even numbered rows go to the right, and that way these rows will all nest together when I put the rows together. Now, this is a little bit tedious, but I am taking my time with this because I think it would be very easy to get these little squares out of order. So what I do is I have them, as you saw earlier, I have all the squares labeled with their fabric letter, and using that as my guide on their little layout map. And I just lay out one row at a time in the blocks in the order that they're to appear in. And then I just stack them from the bottom to the top and just put them here to the side of my sewing machine and sew them in that order. Now, I suppose what I could do, and I thought about doing this, is I could create all the stacks of the squares in advance, label them with a row number, and then go from there. But knowing me, I probably get things mixed up somewhere along the way. Actually, while I'm doing these rows, there's been a couple of occasions where I've actually had the wrong side up of my fabric when I'm putting two squares together. So I've had to unsew those and fix it. So that's what I mean. Because this is not a hard thing. Oh, my needle just thread it. Because this really isn't a hard thing to do, that's where you could make the most mistakes. It would be very easy to get these squares out of order, and then you're screwed. Quite frankly, then you're screwed. So, oops, that didn't work. Okay, try this again. Oh, okay. Needle's not quite the right spot, I guess. There we go. Okay, I'm back into this, so let's pick up where we left off. So as I was said, yeah, it's a little bit tedious, but for me, anyways, it's the best way I can do this in order to keep everything straight and not screwing up. And as I said, I'm finger pressing each square, so my seam is going in the direction I want it to go in. And then what I'll do once I get all the blocks together on this row, so I'll take it over to my iron and I'll give it each seam a press. And then after I'm finished pressing it, I label it, and I put a little label that says what the row number is, and I put that at the top of the row so I know what direction the row will need to be sewn in as well. It's just an added precaution, because in order to get the effect, you do need to sew the rows in the right direction. So I'm almost finished up with this row, and I believe this is row number 8 or 9. Row number 9. Yes, it's row number 9. Good thing. I almost had a heart attack there, because I'm thinking, oh, odd numbers go to the left with the seam, even rows go to the right, and I thought, ooh, I've been finger pressing these in the wrong direction, but I have not. So, see, very easy to screw up on this, because your attention can start to drift, and you don't want to do that. Okay, so I have this row finished. I just need to press it, label it, hang it up, and work on the rest of the rows. So I have all my rows together. Now what I need to do is attach the rows to each other. And essentially what you're doing is you're making a big piece of fabric. And so you can see here I've started to put them together. And I am matching up the seam allowances. That's why I went opposite pressing sides when I was putting these together, so it'll nest together very nicely. If you're off by a hair or so, it's not going to make much difference, because you're going to be cutting these up, and the way that they're cut up, it won't matter if you're off a little bit on the matching up of the seams. However, I would strongly suggest that you try to match them up the best you can. So now we're at the stage where we have to take this big piece and cut it into squares again, but this time we're going to use the tool, the tiny twister, oops, get it in the shot, tiny twister tool. And you can see there's 2 dark lines marked on here. So what you do is you start at the very top left-hand corner, and you place those lines so that they run right along the vertical seam here on the edge and across the horizontal seam here. And line it up, and then you just trim around it. Now I'm using a fairly large rotary cutter, which makes this a little awkward. So I think I may switch over to a 45, but I'm just going to show you what happens here. So there's a square. Now that doesn't look like much to start with, but you work your way all the way along here, and then I'll be sewing these squares together for the first row. As I work my way down, as you can see, say over here where there's color, now you're going to start getting the color in each one of these pieces as you go along here. So yes, there's a lot of cutting to do with this. These are 2 1/4 inch squares that we are cutting out here. And if you look here at the diagram, you see there's a couple of rows of nothing but the white across the top, and then we start getting in the color. So the first couple of rows that I'm cutting are going to be very, very boring. But as we get more into the other colors, you'll start to see this emerge. And so after I get a couple of the rows cut out with some color in them, maybe the first 3 rows, and start putting those together, I'll show you what that looks like then. So here's a little better angle where you'll be able to see exactly how to use this little ruler. So you see here on my piece, I've already cut some out. I have the intersection spots between 4 of the squares, the 3.5-inch squares. So you have a line here and a line here. On the twister, you have a couple of lines as well that intersect. So you line up those 2 intersecting lines so that the horizontal line is along the horizontal seam and the vertical line is on the vertical seam. Line them up, and you center the 2 crosshair lines right with the center of those intersection points, and then take your rotary cutter. And this is a bit time consuming, and it's also a little awkward, so be very careful. You might want to use a smaller rotary cutter. I'm using a 40 or a 60 millimeter. I did try a 45, but I like that better. Now, I think I've just seen something here. See, this one is not square. Not a problem. It's because of the angle I'm cutting at. So I'm just going to square it up. I'm just going to line up the hairs again. And actually, I'm going to turn this around this way because I think it'd make it a little easier and a little safer. Okay, there we go, and just cut off that little piece there. Now it's square, and so there we have my piece. And then what I'm doing is I'm just laying them out in exactly the order that I cut them into a long line. See if you can see it here. And once there are 14 pieces in this particular row, and once I have all the pieces cut and laid out, I will stack them up in order, and then I'll take them to the sewing machine and cut the long row. And then when I've got that cut and I press the seams, I will add it to the row that's there. I don't suggest you cut everything, organize it, then try to do some chain piecing, because it's so easy to get your pieces turned backwards, and they have to be the right way, or you're not going to get the shape of the wreath. You can see here the top of the wreath is starting to develop. I will show you more of this when I get more of these pieces cut. Okay, so now I have the pieces all sewn together in all the rows. There are a lot of little pieces here. There's about, well over 250 pieces now. Those are 2.25-inch squares unfinished. So 2 inches finished, but they create that pattern. Now I need to add some borders to it and possibly a bow. Well, I won't add the bow yet because I need to layer it, put it on my long arm, and I have to figure out what I'm going to use for a quilting motif. So I will come back and show you what that looks like then. Now, just a couple of things though, when you're cutting this, make sure you do not cut more than 1/8 of an inch beyond the edges of your template, because if you do, you have a possibility of cutting into the next piece you're going to cut out. And what'll happen is when you start sewing the pieces together, you may have a hole in one of your little spots. So you have to be careful about that. Also, make sure every row you have lined up the seams so that everything fits together very nicely. And I clip at every seam. And yes, there are a lot of seams to clip on. There's about 14 of them across in each row, but it's well worth the effort to do that, because then everything will match up the way it's supposed to match up and will come out very nice. Also, press as you go. As you create a row, press it. And what I did was I pressed to the side, but each row was alternated. So one went to the left, the next row went to the right, so that my seams would lock together. And then when I got the row on, I pressed it. Now I sewed each row after the row was created. because it's very easy to get a row turned around. I turned one of the rows around, but luckily I caught it early, so I just had to unrip or rip out that one row. And yeah, you've got to be careful about that because this can get a little bit confusing. But I think the end result, it looks pretty good so far. But I'm not done yet. Okay, so now you can see that I have it mounted onto my Lucy, my long arm, and it is doing this poinsettia pattern in here. And there's a lot of negative space in this piece, so this is looking pretty good on it. And I'm using variegated thread on the top in golds, reds, and greens to pick up the red on the greens and the lighter good colors using that combination. So when this gets done and I free it from Lucy, then all I have to do is put the binding on it. So I'll come back and show you what that looks like in a minute. Okay, so now I'm going to sew the the binding to the front of my quilt. I've already sewn it to the back and now I'm folding it over and I have it, as you can see right here. If I can get this in the shot. I have it all clipped all the way across, ready to go. But I have this new foot. It is called and I've come unclipped there, but that's okay. It is called a BL foot from Janome. It's from a Janome machine. A little awkward here. Hello. And it's supposed to help you when you stitch down your binding. Now, apparently there's a little ledge right here on the edge, and I guess that's what you butt the binding up against. But what I'm looking at right now is the fact that that's not where my binding edge is going to go. But we'll give it a try. I'm going to put it on. I've never used this before, so I have no idea what I'm doing, which is probably not a good idea on a video. Oh, shoot. If I can get it on. Okay. There we go. Tried to do it the easy way. That didn't work. All right, now I have set my machine up for a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and it's got the needle is going right down. You probably can't see it. Right next to where this edge is. So, get out my piece. And I'm going to start up here at this end. I never start right at the very top. Okay, so maybe I do it this way. Oh, I'll bet you that's how I do it. So I need to move that needle over. And I want to move that needle over as far as I can go. So let's see here. Okay, I'm over as far as I can go. Now it's resting up against that edge, and let's see what happens. Oops, don't roll over top of the clip. Okay, well, this seems to actually be working pretty good. I'm not sure if this is any better than what I was using before, but I'll reserve my judgment until I get a little bit further on here. It is keeping everything aligned. Really the machine is doing it. The combination of the foot and the feed dogs is keeping my binding straight, and I'm really not having to readjust it to make sure that I'm sewing right on the edge. And I am sewing, well, I'm fairly close to the edge. I don't think I'm as close as I can get if I used a foot without this edge. I think I might be sliding off the edge now. I think you need to get used to this, figure out where to hold it. But it's not doing too bad a job. I just let it do its thing and not try to manhandle it too much. Yeah, it seems to be doing okay job. Now I'm coming up to a corner here, so we'll see what's going to happen with that. Now usually when I come to a corner, what I like to do is take my stiletto and take the clip off my corner and use my stiletto to hold it down so my fingers don't get under there. And then I just go a few stitches into what I approximate to be, you know, close to where I want to start the next edge. I pivot, I leave my needle down, I raise my foot and pivot. And yeah, that worked fairly well. Okay, so I'll finish going all around this and come back and show you the end result and talk a little bit more about that foot and whether or not I like it. Okay, so I have the whole wreath wall hanger all completely finished. I added a bow to it. It's a goldy colored wired ribbon. And what I did was I safety pinned it through the back of the quilt to hold the bow as opposed to just sewing it on, just in case you ever needed to wash this. You'd be able to get that bow off. I think it turned out pretty good. A little close up here. And that tool that I was using, that foot, the BL or bi-level foot from Janome, it's okay. If you could pick it up for 10 bucks, I would, but I think it's 70 bucks. It's a little pricey, and you can do pretty much the same thing with other feet that you already have in your collection. However, I think it's more or less geared towards doing top stitching from the right edge, as opposed to what I was doing over on the left edge. So, as such, I think it would be great for top stitching, but I don't think it's something I'll run out and buy. We already have it because Walter had it in his collection of feet. Which I think would be more useful for him for doing top stitching. So I'll see if he wants that back for that. Yeah, but anyways, so that's the whole process for making this tiny twister holiday twist Christmas wreath using the little twister tool. It's not difficult to do, but it's a little bit tedious, and I don't think I'm going to make a second one. Well, never say never.